RadioShack, Canada's value leader in electronics, makes it easy to shop for Christmas gifts. There's a wide selection of cellular phones for calls on the go, or decorator and cordless phones for everyone. Personal computers for home or office, supported by our sales and service team. The latest VCRs and camcorders for Christmas memories, plus everything in stereo to enjoy the season sounds. Exciting electronic action toys and video games for kids of all ages. All at RadioShack, Canada's value leader in electronics.
CGQ Plus.
All right, so welcome back to another episode of CGQ Flashback. Today we're going to do something maybe just a little bit different. This is a topic that I've wanted to talk about for quite some time, and that is RadioShack, which is like one of the most beloved stores of my childhood. Now, before we get to that, we're going to do mail real quick. Let's see, this was the oldest one. So from, where's your name? Nick in St. Paul, Minnesota. We got a postcard from Minnesota. So that looks pretty neat. This one was kind of funny. So I don't know if this is the same guy. This postcard came from Vietnam. But once again, it's not signed or anything. And it just seems like it's maybe the same guy that sent me a couple postcards from Cambodia. I'm not really sure. Again, there's no name and there's no return address, so I can't send him back a postcard, but I mean, you can see it's even got, it's got stamps there. If it focuses, it's got stamps from Vietnam and everything. And that looks pretty cool. And all he wrote, I know I don't normally read these, but he goes, did anyone ever actually get a blister from a game? Yes, I did when Mario Kart came out. And I think that's in response to one of the magazine read-throughs I did. Where I was kind of making fun of the video game glove advertisement. Next, we got one from Garrett in Hamburg, Germany. So that one looks pretty cool. Someone out there can correct me if I'm misremembering, but I think that's the first postcard that we've gotten from Germany. And then, so I don't know if this counts or not. You know, I said that one of the two continents on the planet from which we have yet to receive a postcard is Africa. And I got this from Steve. And Steve lives in Arlington, Virginia, but he bought this postcard in Egypt when he was visiting. And I'm not really sure what happened here. He says, I attempted to mail this while in Egypt, but I'm not sure it'll make it. And it has a stamp on it from Egypt, and then it's got a stamp on it from the U.S. So he says where he was staying at a shady camp. So I don't know if he was afraid that the postcard was going to get stolen or something. But anyway, that still at least halfway counts. It was purchased in Africa, and it's got an Egyptian stamp on it. So next, I got a little card here from Corey in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I guess Corey has a YouTube channel or something. He sent me a couple of stickers from his YouTube channel, My Life in Gaming. So maybe you guys might want to go check that out. And he has in his note, it says, sorry it took so long to get these to you. Just don't toss them in the trash. And I won't toss them in the trash, Corey. So Marcelo, like hopefully you guys are familiar with the name Marcelo, down in Sao Paulo, Brazil. He sent me all kinds of stuff. Some of it I haven't even shown on the show yet. He sent me another Senna postcard, and he says on the back, I don't read the whole thing, but he just says, I was browsing around an old bookstore downtown, and I found this and a few other Senna cards, and I hope you like it. But then at the same time, there was also this big envelope in the post office box. It's postmarked a week later, but this is while I was on vacation up in Vancouver. And so I didn't check the mail for a couple weeks. And he put a letter in there and just basically said that he decided to send me the rest of the postcards. So, the first one here, this was just, Senna sitting in his car there with his visor up and the 1,000-yard stare going on. The 1991 Brazilian Grand Prix, first time he won in Brazil, and could barely get the trophy over his head because he was having muscle spasms. Here's an older picture of him that looks like that's when he was still racing for Lotus, based on the color of the fire suit. That was probably 85 or 86. Formal Senna, that's Senna in a tuxedo there. That must be one of the after season, awards banquets or whatever, when he got one of his championships. There's just a picture of him driving. I believe that is the 89 MP45. And here he is once again. That looks like he had just won the Grand Prix of Germany. From Scott in Rockford, Illinois, he sent me a very nice letter. He sent me a couple of postcards from the Cave of the Mounds. And then, where is it? He sent me a pretty cool little patch from Cave of the Mounds. And once again, he included a very nice letter. So thank you for that, Scott. By the way, if you're seeing your stuff being featured on the show right now, your return postcard is already in the mail on the way back to you. Next here, we got another package. This one is from Chris, and Chris A, in fact, just like me. In Box Elder, South Dakota, we got a postcard from Mount Rushmore, which I would love to visit someday. Also, Omaha's Henry Dorley Zoo and Aquarium, with a pretty cool tiger on the front there. And then there's a few little items here. Obviously, he, of course, sent me a letter, which, again, Chris, thank you very much for the very nice letter. First, we have an NES controller enamel pin. I got this little stuffed Nintendo controller. And then I believe I haven't opened... Well, we can open them right now. I was kind of waiting to open these until I made this video. So, I'm sorry, Chris. I hope you didn't send these to me hoping that I would keep them sealed. So, it's pretty neat. It comes with, like a reproduction, dust cover type thing, but it's made out of paper. In the dust cover, we get 4 coasters, and I was kind of curious to see if they were the same game or not, and they're not. You get... but they all are shaped like cartridges. So you get Super Mario Brothers, and they're on cork, so that you can put a drink on them. Super Mario Brothers 1, Super Mario Brothers 3, Duck Hunt, and Metroid. So those are pretty cool. I have a plethora, for those of you who have seen the Three Amigos. I now have a plethora of coasters for the basement. So thank you very much, Chris. This next one was very cool. This is from Joshua in Carterville, Illinois. And Joshua, of course, also sent me a very nice letter. And in that letter, Joshua explains that he used to work at Toys R Us. He said he worked at Toys R Us for, I think he said like 18 years. He worked at Toys R Us for 18 years. So I'm sorry if you lost your job because of Toys R Us closing. I hope that everything works out okay for you. I got a couple of arcade tokens, which he explains in the letter where the arcade tokens are from. The Challenges token is from an arcade that used to be in the University Mall in Carbondale, Illinois. This was the best arcade we had in the area. I have many memories of going there. Yeah, I really miss arcades a lot. It's funny, I think about arcades a lot. Just because that was one of the big reasons to go to the mall, was like every mall had an arcade in it. Now I can't really find a reason to go to the mall. Just being a 40-year-old guy, there's just not too much for me to do there. And so he mentions in the letter that I might have to make some modification to this to make it more accurate. But he tried to send me, to the best of his ability, a little Chris minifigure. Is it? I feel like it's not focusing on that. But, he's wearing the kind of shirt that I would wear, and he's got, a dark cap on, and he's got glasses, but Joshua mentions in his letter, he didn't have a minifigure head that had a beard and glasses, and he says that if I have one, I should feel free to switch it out. And I still haven't looked, but for some reason I feel like I do. And then it came with a little, I don't know if he printed this out. It's not going to, okay, it did. A little tiny game controller. So that's really awesome. That's, because now I've got 2 drawings of myself from people, and now I've got a little Chris minifigure. So that's pretty awesome. I talked, when I talked about disappointment at Toys R Us, I talked about the tag system of where you would go, you'd pick out what cartridge you want, and you'd grab the tag and take it up to the register. And he found, I guess while they were closing the store, he found a tag. I think he said it was underneath a display case or something like that. And this is Tetris 2, which you can see was on clearance for $9.97. And then he also said in here that he included some shelf tags. So that's like, you know, these things that would actually go on the edge of the shelf. So like there's Game Boy Batman the Animated Series, Super Nintendo Street Fighter 2, Final Fight, $44.99 for that one. Game Boy Advance Super Mario World, which was Super Mario Advance 2, maybe. Sega Genesis 2 Sonic Spinball Pack, $99. Sega CD with Tomcat Alley. So I'm assuming that was, you got the system and it was bundled with Tomcat Alley. Super Nintendo Mortal Kombat, $29.98. Wow, look at this. Doom for the Sega 32X, $64.99. Ouch. Super Nintendo Secret of Evermore. And then we just have one more package. This comes from Tommy. Tommy is in Somers Point, New Jersey. He sent 3 postcards, and I showed my wife these postcards, and it gave her the idea. Now she wants to frame all the postcards that I get, but I have way too many to frame them. But these are really cool. I want to make sure that I'm showing these in the right order. The first one here is like a reproduction Save the Clock Tower flyer from Back to the Future. The second one, here are some iconic motor vehicles of the 80s. Up top there, you've got Kit from Knight Rider, one of my favorite shows when I was a kid. And then next down, you've got the Ecto-1 from Ghostbusters. Then you have the van from the A-Team. And, of course, the time-traveling DeLorean, once again, from Back to the Future. And then last, I mean, these are all awesome, so it's hard to say, like, oh, this one's my favorite. But this one was just a little bit extra awesome, in my opinion. And that's, what does it say here? 1988 World Tour Shred live at the Technodrome. So that's amazing. I don't know where you would have gotten these. We got them on Redbubble. That's pretty cool. But I mean, that's awesome. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was, while it was on TV, was probably my favorite cartoon. I've always said I don't like the NES game that much, but I seem to be in the minority on that one. So I feel like maybe I just need to give it more of a try. I don't really know. And then he mentioned in his letter that this is one of his favorite NES games, and that he has great memories of playing this game 2-player with his dad, much like the memories I have of playing Super Mario Brothers with my dad. And the game that he sent us is Jackal. And then sort of the last thing, so he sent, the game came in one of these plastic, like rental style boxes, but he actually sent us 3 of them. And these are just like the old style, like the one I have here, like this is an original one from back in the day. But these appear to be, I guess I'm not plugged in enough to know, but these are obviously brand new, so somebody must be making new ones now. They say GGG on them, so I don't know. Somebody in the comments, I'm sure someone knows where these came from, but it's cool that somebody's making these again. And thank you, Tommy, for sharing 3 of them with me. And thank you for just, that was a really awesome package. So I've been wanting to make this video for probably over a year, actually. And that's talking about RadioShack. When I was a kid, much like probably most of you, my favorite stores were Toys R Us and KB Toys. But I might put RadioShack in like 3rd place. Whenever we would go to the store, like, RadioShacks were just ubiquitous in strip malls and in shopping malls. And anytime we would go to the store, if it was in the same strip mall as a RadioShack, I would always ask, can I go to RadioShack? And then, oh yeah, fine. They'd go grocery shopping or whatever, and I would go to RadioShack. When I was a kid, I had kind of a fascination with electronics. Not that I was good at any of it, but like I love taking things apart. Like anything electric or electronic that I could take apart I would. Like those little DC motors that were in like every electric toy when we were kids. I had like a box full of those. Like I would harvest little parts out of anything that I could, just like switches, like little mini light bulb sockets, and I would just make little rudimentary circuits. Like I had no idea what I was doing, but I just loved playing around with all that kind of stuff. And at some point, I was about 10 years old. My dad and my stepmom bought me one of those. I have it here. One of these science fair electronic project kits. Like Science Fair was RadioShack's brand for this type of educational toy. And, and so it like this came with, for anybody that hasn't seen one, it has all these little terminals, these spring terminals, where you can just bend the spring to the side and you can put a wire in there. And it comes with all these different lengths of wire. It comes with, I don't know if you guys remember, these little earpieces that they used to also sell with all of their little pocket transistor radios. It comes with like a little antenna. Because, you could make all kinds of stuff with this thing. And I have the manual here. Obviously, we're not going to go through the manual. But, I've got the manual, and it's just got just all these different, electronic metronome or electronic organ. You could even make, like, a little rudimentary radio or electronic thermometer. And it just had, they're not schematics. I don't know what you call them. It would just tell you, take a wire and attach it from this point to that point and that point to that point. If my parents were trying to buy me something just to get me to go in my room and be quiet, it definitely worked. RadioShack sold a lot of cool products for kids, like just electronic toys or stuff like this. So I don't know how many of you guys remember this. They used to give these away. I used to have a bunch of them. Tandy Computer Whiz Kids comics that were just free. But really, they were just advertisements to get kids interested in computers and electronics and stuff. But I used to always grab those. Maybe starting in like October or something, they would roll out all these extra like toys that they didn't normally sell for like their big Christmas push. And there'd be all kinds of little electromechanical toys or electronic toys. Like I remember I don't remember even why I got it, but I had this little, I think it was either a slot machine or a poker machine, but it wasn't even electric. It was spring loaded. So you would pull this little arm and these little dials would roll just like a slot machine. But they had like knockoff, like the little LCD type games. In fact, I think I might have, that's not from RadioShack, but like Nintendo had the Game & Watch games, and of course, so RadioShack had like knockoffs of those, or you had like Coleco Electronic Quarterback. RadioShack had like knockoffs of those. They had all that kind of stuff, and that was mostly stuff that they sold during the holidays. And so I used to go in there all the time and look at that kind of stuff. Whenever they had their catalogs, I would always take those because I would take those home and just read through them. And the other reason I loved going in there is that when I was a kid, I was just fascinated by computers. Like I wanted a computer in the worst way when I was a kid, but that was like, I never even bothered asking for a computer because it's like, I might as well have been asking for a Ferrari. It's no different than like, I remember the first time I ever saw a Sega Genesis at Toys R Us. And I was just like, wow, but there was no way I was going to get a computer. But so I would go into RadioShack because they would have their computers like set up. You'd go in there may be like, whatever the then current model was of the TRS-80 or like one of their color computers, like the Tandy Color Computer or Color Computer 2 or 3, or later on the Tandy 1000 PC clone. And so like I used to go in there and play around with those. Like they'd have like a TRS-80 set up and it would just be at like the basic prompt. And so like I would sit there and write like really simple basic programs, like just to have it display text on the screen, not actually do anything like noteworthy. Maybe fittingly, the first job I ever had, like real job, was working at RadioShack. Like when I was in like junior high and high school, I would grab like the flex rake out of the garage and just lay it across the handlebars of my bike and just ride around the neighborhood. And any yard that I saw that was full of leaves, I'd go up to the door real fast and I would, hey, can I rake your leaves for, $5 or $10? You had to make a judgment call depending on like how big the yard was, My point is just that outside of that, I never had a job in high school. Senior year of high school, there was this like local BBS bulletin board system, computer bulletin board system, for anybody that doesn't know. It had like 25 lines. And so that means that 25 people could be logged onto it at the same time. And they had this chat room. And so that was kind of a popular thing to do back then, because that way everybody was local. And in fact, a lot of the people in the chat room were people that I knew in high school, and not even necessarily computer nerds. It was just like people that had a computer and they'd go home and had nothing to do, and they would dial into this BBS and we'd hang out in the chat room. But I met this guy in the chat room who turned out was the manager of one of the local Radio Shacks. And I think I mentioned that I was going to be looking for a job when I graduated, and he was just like, yeah, come see me when you graduate. And so I went and saw him when I graduated, and he's like, okay, well, you got to fill out this application. And he's like, do you have any experience? He's like, I'm not going to be the one interviewing you. Like, do you have any experience in like retail or with electronics? And I was like, no, I mean, I have a computer at home, but I don't know, I don't have any like, job experience. He's like, all right, well, he basically coached me on how to lie on my application. And he said, well, you just got to put down that you like, just say that you worked somewhere, and I told him, I was like, well, there was this store I used to shop at. So anybody that had a computer, maybe back in like the early 90s, maybe you'll know what I'm talking about. But there were like these little mom and pop, like independently owned computer stores. And there was one near my house. And it was the kind of place where you'd walk in there and there weren't really any fixtures at all or anything. It was just tables where they were like assembling computers and stuff. And it just had like a desk. And then like on the wall behind the desk was like a dry erase board with the current prices of all the different like processors, different sized hard drives, sticks of RAM, video cards. Cause like back then, especially with memory, like buying RAM was like buying fish. Like you were going to pay the market rate that day. And so I told him about that. He's like, oh, that's perfect because they're closed. Just say that you used to work there, but you were in high school, so they paid you under the table. I was like, oh, okay, And then I have to go for my job interview. There was like one store manager who was like above all the other store managers, but he was still not the district manager. So if you wanted to work at any of the stores, he interviewed you. And what I didn't know at the time was his actual Radio Shack was in the same strip mall as the computer shop that I was falsely claiming that I worked at. And I think he mentioned at some point, he's like, oh yeah, I'm the manager of the Radio Shack over wherever, and I was like, oh, that's cool, and he's like, oh, I see you worked for, Bob or whatever at the store. And I was like, oh yeah, but he just paid me under the table because I was just a kid. And he's like, oh, what'd you do over there? And I was like, oh, I would just assemble computers. And I was kind of like starting to sweat because I was like, oh man, he knows that guy, but I guess the store's closed. And he was just like, oh, okay, well, that's cool. And then he moved on. And I was like, oh man, thank goodness. When I worked there, so that would have been like the mid 90s. And that was really in some ways when Radio Shack started kind of going downhill. And it kind of always makes me sad because at some point Radio Shack just kind of turned into this joke. Where it was like people would just kind of make fun of it, like, oh, Radio Shack, but back in its heyday, like Radio Shack was no joke. Like that's where you went. Like you could go in there and buy like radios or TVs or all these different like electronic components or computers. And like there was no shame, like if you had a Tandy 1000 computer at home, like that was a perfectly good computer. Or if you had one of their high-end stereos, like that was a nice stereo. But by the mid 90s, like I said, I only worked there for like 6 months, and we sold all the same stuff. Like we sold televisions and we sold all kinds of audio video equipment. I don't remember anybody ever buying any of that stuff. Like people would come into Radio Shack mostly for things like batteries. Like, this was before cell phones were ubiquitous. So like everybody still had a home phone. And, we all had cordless phones by then. Like you'd always have at least one cordless phone in your house. And so they, of course, had rechargeable batteries in them. And people would come in there to get replacement batteries. So by the time I worked at Radio Shack, they didn't make their own computers anymore. Speaking of which, Radio Shack didn't make a lot of the stuff that they sold. Obviously, all the little components, they didn't make any of that stuff. They just bought them from factories. But even like their audio video equipment, it was always just rebranded something else. And that was part of the reason that there was nothing wrong with buying like a Radio Shack stereo system or something, is that you were getting a rebadged some other brand that was like good. They made their own computers. Like you can look and it'll say like they were made in like Fort Worth, Texas, which is where, RadioShack was based out of, was Fort Worth, Texas. They would assemble those, computers, themselves. But, by the time I worked at RadioShack, they didn't sell Tandy computers anymore. And while I was there, they just had the one computer on display, and it was an IBM Aptiva. But it was probably like a first generation Pentium or something. I don't actually remember, but this was 95. So, but we sold computer games there too. And I remember, so sometimes the boxes weren't sealed because maybe it got returned or something. And, we would take the return, like everything was in the box. We're like, fine. Like we didn't have a shrink wrap machine. So somebody would return it and we would just go put it back on the shelf, And I remember that we had this game IndyCar. If you guys remember the IndyCar game, I think it was just called IndyCar from the mid 90s. It was made by Papyrus. And we had that boxed up on the shelf and it was open. So somebody must have bought it and returned it. I had a computer back then. And I was like, oh man, I want to check that game out. And so and nobody ever bought computer games from us ever. Like, I don't think I ever sold one of those games. And so I took the game off the shelf and I opened the box and I took the discs out of it. Because I'm like, I'm going to take this home and I'm going to install it in my computer and I'll bring the discs back. But what happened was I kept forgetting to bring them back. And then we did, we either had an inventory or my boss just went around the store and was checking stuff. I don't remember which. But I remember he found the box and he found that the discs were missing. He assumed somebody stole it, but he yelled at us. He was a nice guy. He didn't really yell at us, but he kind of gave us a talking to about how like people are stealing stuff out of the store and we're not doing a good job of watching the store, which was true. We didn't do a good job of watching the store. But so anyway, I ended up keeping the discs because I think he threw the box out and I was like, oh, and plus I couldn't put them back or it would be really obvious that one of us took them. So I actually still have the discs. But I mean, I'm not proud of that because I didn't mean to keep them, but it just like, it's my own irresponsibility of not bringing them back after taking them in the first place, which I shouldn't have done. But yeah, we definitely did not do a good job of watching the store. So like every Sunday, my manager's name was Ron. The only day of the week Ron got off was Sundays. So he worked 6 days a week because they were on salary. So like RadioShack had overworked managers because they didn't have to pay him overtime. And so he only had Sundays off. And I worked with, it was me, Ron was the boss, and then it was me and these two brothers, Paul and Dwayne. And like Paul was cool, but Paul's friends would always come and visit the store. And like Paul's friends all hated me for some reason. But Dwayne was really into like rock music and playing the guitar, which I was also into at that time. So like for some reason on Sundays, it was always me and Dwayne on the schedule, just the two of us. Because that, the store was probably open like, this was 20 some odd years ago, on a Sunday. Like when I was a kid, stores weren't open on Sundays. And then later they'd be open on Sundays, but I think our store was open from like 10 to 5 or 10 to 6. You didn't really get a whole lot of business coming in on Sundays anyway. So we used to always hang out in the back room. He convinced me to start bringing I had an electric guitar. I still have it. I don't play it anymore, but he convinced me to bring it to work because, one of the other things that RadioShack sold was like PA equipment. They had like mixers, but like PA mixers and microphones for that. And then they sold an amplifier for you to use with like a guitar or a keyboard or something like that. And so like I would bring in my guitar on Sundays and like Dwayne would not lift a finger really unless all of a sudden we got slammed somehow, which didn't really usually happen on a Sunday. But he would go out and he would grab the display model of the guitar amp, which was probably the only one we had because that would often happen. Like any of the high dollar items at RadioShack, the one you saw on the shelf, that was it. Like there wasn't a brand new one in the back, like the box was in the back. And if somebody wanted like an amplifier, like a stereo receiver or a TV, you grabbed the one off the shelf and boxed it up and made them pay full price for it, which seemed kind of messed up, which is probably another reason that people didn't buy stuff from our store. But so Dwayne would go grab the amplifier off the wall and he'd go in the back room and plug that thing in and he would turn it up and he couldn't play guitar very well. I mean, neither of us could. And he'd sit back there and he'd be wailing on that thing. And it was just like the little, crappy wall between the back room and the front of the store. So it was very thin. So like customers would come in the store and I'm trying to help them find like a replacement battery for their cordless phone or something. And you can just hear all this awful electric guitar music coming out of the back. And it was just the funniest thing. Because I'm trying to just play it straight. You know, I was like Ed McMahon, just like, oh yeah, okay, well, you're going to need the 31C battery for that. And in the background, you're just hearing like, wah, 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 wah. It was pretty funny. And then he used to, you know, we used to always keep the back door open to the back because like Dwayne would go, he'd open the back door and stand outside by the dumpster. And, you know, because back then, I mean, we both smoked cigarettes. And so we'd always go in the back and we'd smoke cigarettes, or sometimes Dwayne would be back there smoking something else, which is another reason that he wouldn't come out and help the customers. But, because, you know, of course, on the front door, there was that little thing that went like beep boop whenever anybody came in. So we could hang out back smoking. And if you heard that, then one of us would run out. Paul got fired because, you know, there was that running joke about Radio Shack. It was even on Seinfeld, like, you know, why do I have to give my name and address to buy batteries at Radio Shack? And we really did have to, anytime you sold anything, Radio Shack wanted you to ask the customer, what's your name? And you put that, what's your address? And nobody ever wanted to do it because why would you? But that was because Radio Shack would start sending them catalogs, or they would send them like the sales. They would do a lot of direct mailing of like the sales flyers. And so they would sell those, and people would never want to do that. But that was like one of the things that the district manager and the higher ups would look at is like, what percentage of your sales did you get a name and address for? But at my store, we just didn't care. I didn't even ask. I just hit return like however many times to get past that part on the screen so that I could just like ring these people up, you know? Like if it was a bigger ticket item, it's like, well, that's so that we have your name and address so that if you need to return it, we know that it's you. But that's totally not what it was for. But I think it was Paul. Paul got fired because he wrote something kind of smarmy in the name and address field. Like not vulgar, but like I forgot what he put. But either the customer noticed and complained, or I mean, they used to read that stuff higher up. And it's not like they didn't know who was manning the POS when they typed it in. So it got back and Paul got canned. But you know, these days, like, you know, obviously Radio Shack's gone. And really the reason I'm even making this episode right now is the Radio Shack down in the same shopping center as one of the grocery stores that I go to. That was like one of the last Radio Shacks to close. And that was the last Radio Shack that was really local to me. And I still used to go in there to buy stuff, like little components and stuff. If I was like modifying a console or like making an adapter, like a controller adapter or something, you know, I would go to Radio Shack to buy that stuff. And they survived the first big round of store closings, but they didn't survive the second round because, of course, nobody did. And so whenever I go to that store, that grocery store, it always reminds me like, oh, I need to make that Radio Shack episode. And I think it's finally gone now, but for a long time, the sign, the letters or whatever were over the top of the storefront, even though the store was empty. And I really wanted to bring I was going to put on like a reflective safety vest. So I looked like I, you know, was supposed to be doing it, and just drive my pickup truck over there and take the sign down and keep it. But you know, my wife was like, what are you going to do with that? Because I mean, it was humongous. It's not like I could even put it up in the garage. It was too big. Just a normal iPhone has replaced so many of the things that Radio Shack sold, like, you know, Walkmans and Discmans and, you know, people use this, even you just plug it into your stereo or whatever. And so they don't have any of that kind of stuff. And who really does DIY anymore? Like, you used to be able to go to Radio Shack and they had this whole system of things you could purchase for like home automation, you know, so you could have like all of your lights controlled with like remote controls and stuff like that. Or you could build your own like home alarm system, and they would sell all the components for that. Nobody does any of that kind of stuff anymore. And certainly nobody really repairs things anymore. Like if you have like a little radio or something and it breaks, you send it to e-waste and you get a new one. And they're kind of designed that way. But back in the day, they weren't. You could have like a little tabletop radio that you might buy at Radio Shack. And then when it breaks, you could go to Radio Shack to buy the parts to repair it. And like you could even bring the radio to Radio Shack, and the people that worked there were like smart enough and experienced enough that they would be able to help you and say, oh yes, this capacitor is blown or whatever. And they'd sell you a new one. That type of business has just become obsolete, and it's kind of sad. But, and so that's why whenever I go to the grocery store and I see the empty storefront, it just reminds me of Radio Shack. So I've got the 86 catalog. Then I've got the 1991 catalog, which you can see still has a Tandy 1000 on it. That's a different one. That's maybe like a 1000 RLX or something. I don't know. We'll see. And then I don't know if I'll even bother going through this last one, to be honest, but I got this one. This is the catalog that was current when I worked there. So this was the 95 catalog. And so I just bought that for old time's sake. But I think we won't even bother opening this one. I just thought it'd be cool to check out the other two. All right, so here we've got the 86 catalog, and I mean, I haven't gone through this ahead of time or anything to really like formulate any thoughts, but I just wanted to go through some of it real quick just for fun. Now here they've got VCRs, and look how much a VCR cost in the mid 80s. Their high-end one you can see here is $600, and that's over $1,000 adjusted for inflation. So that's no joke. And well, actually here, this one's even higher, $700. Stereo equipment, like I said, if you bought a stereo back in the day at RadioShack, Optimus was their high-end stereo equipment. Realistic was sort of like the consumer grade, but Optimus, so you can see this Optimus system was, over $1,100, so that would be well over $2,000 now. Here's a couple of linear tracking turntables. You can see the price is not too bad, but I don't know if that's reflective of the fact that by, the mid 80s cassettes were becoming very popular. Check this out. We get into keyboards. I don't know if these were rebranded Casios, just these little toy keyboards. I remember high intensity strobe light. We still sold these when I worked there almost 10 years later. Those were extremely bright. Headphones. I know Koss made some of Realistic's headphones. I'm not saying they made all of them. But, over-the-ear headphones were pretty popular back then. But then they also sold these smaller headphones because, of course, a lot of people were using Walkmans by then. Portable stereos. We always called them ghetto blasters when I was a kid. I feel like that's not a very PC thing to say. Probably not something people would say anymore. But these were extremely popular back then. I of course, had one that my mom gave me. And that was really the only stereo system that I had for quite some time. Like, they wouldn't necessarily have all of this stuff in the store. Some of it you might have to order, but like I said, this was back in the day before, things like Amazon or just online shopping in general. So, there was stuff like the RadioShack catalog or the Sears catalog. Like I mentioned, this was one of the best places to buy a telephone back then. They sold so many different telephones. You'll see there's several pages of them, like slimline telephones for like your nightstand, these old-timey looking phones, phones that don't even have a cradle because you just put it straight down on the desk or the table. There's a big button telephone for old people, phones with built-in memory in them. Wow, a pocket pager, look at that. And then we get into, here's like a mobile phone. They're even showing how, you guys remember you had to have the separate unit that was installed in the trunk of your car. Or, you can go portable. So I guess this was the same phone and you could just take it and go portable with it. And then they even have a little bit of cordless phones. Cordless phones were already a thing by the mid 80s. Some of them had flexible antennas. Some of them had the telescoping antennas, but it was very often, that, you'd end up breaking or bending the telescoping antenna. So you couldn't get it to go all the way back in anymore. Well, who needs that? A telephone tester. And it was $300. I don't know. I don't know if you were like a building manager or something, you'd want something like that. Speaker amplifier. I think I was kind of talking about that a little bit earlier. Low cost pocket tone dialer. I actually have that tone dialer. And that was like, if you were trying to call your answering machine from a payphone or something, and the payphone, back then a lot of payphones were rotary. That way you could dial into your answering machine. I don't know why I have one of those and I just think it's neat. So I keep it even though I don't use it. And then who remembers these? The FM wireless home intercoms. We had this set when I was a kid at my dad's house. Like one of them was upstairs and one of them was downstairs. And I remember I used to annoy the crap out of my stepmom because I'd be constantly calling her on this thing because you had to ask permission for every little thing when you were a kid. So you'd push the little call button so it would beep upstairs and like, can I have a bowl of cereal? And it's like, yes, just stop bothering me. Then we get into some TVs. Here's some portable TVs. When I was a kid, portable TVs were like a pretty big deal. And I actually really miss those. Ever since TV switched over to digital, it seems like portable TVs aren't really a thing anymore. Because, back then, you'd set this up somewhere. Maybe the picture would be kind of snowy, but like my mom used to have one of these at her job because then she could still watch football on Sundays, like sitting in the ticket booth. And then they have, here's like some like smaller TVs. Look, you could still buy in 1986 a black and white television. Not so dissimilar from the one that I had in my room when I was a kid, except this one is much newer. Even then, look how much a 13-inch TV would cost you back then. That's a lot of money for a pretty small television. This was, of course, back before everybody had cable, although cable did exist in the 80s, but you didn't really know usually that many people that had them. And so most of us had antennas on our roof. I mean, I still have an antenna on my roof because I don't have cable. But, so back then that was something people took seriously, is having a really nice antenna on your roof. If you lived in an area where you could get reception from multiple places, like if not all of the transmission towers were the same direction from you, you could get one of these motors to put on your antenna mast and then have the control box like in your living room. And then you would point the antenna. Here's the satellite dish system, and look how much. In $1986, it was $2,000. So that's a little bit probably north of $4,000 now to have a satellite TV system. I don't think I even knew anybody when I was a kid that had a satellite TV system. Tabletop radios, my grandparents had that one, number 4, realistic MTA 11. I've been looking for one of those because I would like to have one just for old time's sake. Maybe set it up in the kitchen. They used to have that set up on a little shelf in the kitchen, and it was always on. And I think maybe they thought that way if someone tried to break into the house, they'd hear the radio on and not want to come in. I don't really know, but they always had that turned on in the kitchen, and it was tuned into one of those stations that doesn't really exist anymore, where it was like, what do you call that? Like easy listening music, where they took like pop songs and rearranged them and had an orchestra play them instead. That's what was always playing in there. It was mounted like right above the kitchen table. And so I just thought it'd be cool to have one of those again. Clock radios were very popular back in the 80s and early 90s. You'd always have them set to wake you up to music. Batteries. I didn't even talk about batteries. So that was one of the big things people bought at RadioShack was batteries back when, people don't use batteries as much anymore as they used to, just because so many things now, like phones and whatnot, just have built-in proprietary rechargeable batteries. And, RadioShack had like different levels of battery. They had alkaline and not alkaline, but I think these red batteries were like the lowest grade, and then the green batteries were like the mid-level, and then these gold batteries were their alkaline batteries, and that was like the highest quality battery they had. You could also go in there and buy like sort of like harder to find batteries. Like nobody really uses these anymore, I guess. These 6-volt lantern batteries. I mean, you can see that's a D cell. Lantern batteries were pretty big, but as the description suggests, they were to put in things like electric lanterns, or just some larger flashlights took those. And I can't remember the last time I saw a lantern battery. People used to also come into RadioShack a lot for stuff like that, like specialty batteries, like watch batteries, hearing aid batteries, like little button cell batteries. Then we just get into a lot of electric components. Like I said, they just sold a lot. If you were just like a home hobbyist or something, breadboards and like different kinds of PC connectors, they sold a lot of that kind of stuff. And we did sell some of that stuff. I'll tell you this, when we had to do inventory of the store, having to count all of this stuff was the worst. It was really easy to say like, okay, this stereo receiver, we have one, check. But when you had to go count all the batteries or count all the different little resistors, that was like the worst part, and you'd save it for last. I remember metal detectors. We always sold these metal detectors there. They had this little $20 one that was really just for kids. And then they had some of the higher end models. I have never in my life played with a metal detector. It seems like it would be fun, but here we get into the science fair hobby kits like I was talking about. See, that's the one that I actually had, is the 160 in one. So I did not have the 70. I didn't think 75 sounded right. That's the exact one that I had. But you can see the layout's very similar to what mine was like. And, that this was like the deluxe model here, but I was very happy with the one that I had. And you can see they sold a number of those. 30 in one, solar powered kit, radio kit. So like some of these fancier ones just sort of integrated some of the other ones, like multiple ones together. There's a 60 in one, so that one's a little bit more of a budget model, so that's pretty cool. But yeah, a lot of electronic, educational electronic toys for kids. And here's a bunch of more toys. For the most part, like the remote control cars they sold at RadioShack were not very good. And then, yeah, so some of these you can see, I remember these, like it just had a switch on the remote control, or whatever you want to call it. And it could either go forward, or when you went backwards, it turned. And that's the only way you could turn. So that was really lame. But, the other ones actually came with proper remote controls. And what else? Like I talked about how they kind of had their own knockoff Game & Watch type thing. So here's Plane and Tank Battle for $12.95. So that's the kind of thing you might get for Christmas, is like a stocking stuffer. Or here's Pocket Repeat. If you guys remember Simon, there was Simon, there was like a Pocket Simon, and then RadioShack made this Pocket Repeat game. And then here, this is similar to those tabletop Coleco arcade games. Astro Thunder. Remember the Tandy Model 100? I remember I used to drool over this in the display case. It was a little portable computer with just an LCD screen. So you really couldn't do a whole lot with it compared to an actual computer, but it was also only $600. There's the Tandy Color Computer 2. So that was kind of like their answer, I guess, to something like a Commodore 64. So you see for a 64K model, it was $219. So that's 64K of RAM. Or you get the 16K version for only $120. And I mean, these were actually pretty decent little low-end computers. They took cartridges. I believe they had a tape input. I'm not sure if you could hook a floppy disk up to it or not, but back then to have a computer at all was a luxury. And so having something like that was really not so bad. That's the joystick. Again, that looks just like a craft joystick. Color Computer external expansion. So this is stuff that I guess you would add to the Color Computer 2. Appliance and light controller or multi-pack interface. So this would just allow you, like, it would work like a game brain for an Atari 2600, and you could just put cartridges in there. The appliance and light controller actually sounds like something that would be more fun to play with. And here's some cassette recorders that are specifically designed to go with the Tandy Color Computer. Here you can buy DeskMate software for $100. DeskMate was kind of like Tandy's version of Windows. It was a graphical user interface. Here's just some more disk software. So I guess you could add. So this is a floppy disk for the Color Computer. So I wasn't sure if you could add a floppy disk drive to that, but that's what that is. So, and then this is just floppy disk software for the Color Computer. External modems. Here's one of these modems where they call that an acoustic coupler. So you actually put your phone line on there. So if you ever watched the movie War Games, that's, the main character, David, that's how he has to use his IMSI to dial into the Whopper, is with an acoustic coupler. Wow, they still had, so that's the TRS-80, that's the Model 4D for $1,200. Now, certainly by 1986, the TRS-80 was very much long in the tooth, but $1,200 for an all-in-one computer at that point really wasn't too bad of a price. And I believe that the D in 4D stood for DeskMate, because this one included a TRS-80 version of the DeskMate software. For anybody that, there's a YouTube channel called V Westlife. It's actually one of my favorite YouTube channels. And he does a whole video about his Model 4D. Here we go. Well, I guess in a second. Multi-user Tandy 6000. I'm not at all familiar with this computer, so I can't really say anything about it. But wow, look at the price. $5,400. That's over $10,000 adjusted for inflation for a 512K computer with a built-in 15 megabyte hard drive. That's crazy. And then over here we have the Tandy 2000. And then down here you've got the Tandy 1200, a mirror image of IBM's PC XT for less money. And I don't know how much the PC XT cost, but I'm sure it was well over $2,000. This one is $19.99, and it says it costs thousands less. So I don't know how much a PC XT was. But that's just for the computer. Monochrome monitor was going to be another $219. Or you could get the CM2 high resolution color monitor for $459. But then you'd have to buy a special video card for another $299. So you could easily get the price of this up closer to $3,000. So there's desk. This is just more of a thing for, they're trying to show you DeskMate here. But it already comes preloaded if you buy a Tandy 1000. So here's the Tandy 1000 for $1,000, probably not coincidentally. This was an XT class computer that they sold back then. I think it had an 8086 processor in it. Oh, it says down here, oh, no, 8088. That's not bad. Running at 4.77 megahertz. That was what I had in my very first computer, was an 8088. But I didn't get that until about 4 years later. So when I got my computer, it was pretty out of date. Came with 128 megs, or 128K of RAM. Of course, you didn't get a hard drive for this price. MS-DOS 2.1. It came with a 90 key keyboard, and Tandy computers generally came with pretty good keyboards. Optional high resolution, non-glare, 12-inch monochrome monitor. So I guess for that price, you didn't get a monitor, which, I mean, it's understandable because $1,000 for a PC clone back then was a very competitive price. So you could get a 10 megabyte external hard disk for $700. That's nuts. But, back then, hard drives were very much a luxury item. And the monochrome monitor that is pictured up here was $150, or a CM4 color monitor was going to be $300. And then you could buy the same CM2 for this computer that you could get for the Tandy 2000. But anyway, these were actually, like I said, these were pretty good computers. I had an XT when I was a kid, just an IBM clone. And I had a lot of fun with that. So, and then on the last page is just, I guess if you open the cover this way, they show more of their stuff. But, well, the only thing I was interested in the 91 catalog was checking out the computer section. So actually, let's just bust it out real quick and look at the computers. I just got to take it out of its protective sheath. And, yeah, wow, this is when they started selling camcorders. So I guess that would have been kind of a trip to look at, but you don't really have time for that. Here's, oh man, they started making these data bank type things. So this is 91, so this is 5 years later than that one. They still sold the Tandy 100, although now it's the Tandy 102. So now it's got 32K of memory in it. Well, they still sold the Color Computer. Now it's the Color Computer 3 for $200. Of course, for that price, it doesn't come with the monitor and the disk drive. Still had that same joystick, Craft. Pretty sure it's a Craft joystick. All these accessories. I just want to get back to the computers. Oh, wow, look at all these games. They got some pretty cool games in there. There's Starflight 2, Draken, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. There's one of the AD&D Gold Box games. Outrun, Battle Chess. Anyway. Wow, here's showing that's where they make the computers. Like I said, the computers were made here in the U.S. Assembled. I'm not sure that the actual motherboard was made here, but I mean, maybe it was. I really don't know. Tandy monitors. I just want to get to where the actual computers are. You can still buy an LCD, monochrome laptop. Now it's only $800 though. Oh, here's one for $2,000. Yeah. Okay. So here's the Tandy. So this is the Tandy 1000 RL. You can see now it comes in this nice slimline case. And where are the specs on here? I wanted to see if this is a 286 or 386 at this point. I thought it was a 286. Well, all right. Well, we won't worry about it, but certainly it's a lot nicer than the original Tandy 1000 anyway. And it was only $600, or if you paid $1,000 for it. So remember, the Tandy 1000 was $1,000. Now, 5 years later, for that same $1,000, you could get this Tandy 1000 RL that came with a 20 megabyte hard drive built in and 512K of RAM. The first hard drive I ever had was a 20 megabyte hard drive. Back then, that was pretty roomy. You could put a lot of stuff on a 20 meg hard drive. Some extra accessories for the RL. Tandy 1000 TL2. That one I'm not actually familiar with, so I don't really know. You see it's $1,000, so a little bit more expensive than the base model RL here. Not sure exactly what that comes with. It doesn't come with a hard drive for that price. I wonder if that has like a 386. No, this has a 286 in it. So I wonder if the RL was still an XT. Maybe that's why they're not telling you what kind of processor it comes with. So this one's a 286, has 640K of RAM. So that's why it's a little more expensive. You, of course, still had to buy the monitor separately. It says here, though, complete system. You get this system with the CM11 color monitor, 20 megabyte hard drive, and mouse for $1,700. And then here's a Tandy 250 XL, which you could pimp out for $3,000. And that comes with still a 286 processor. This one's 8 megahertz. This one's 10 megahertz. This one has 1 megabyte of RAM, upgradable to 16 megabytes. This one comes with a 16-bit VGA card in it. So that explains why that's more expensive. For $299 here, or $229.99 rather. It comes with a CD-ROM drive for that price too. Wow. So that's part of why that one's so expensive. Well, that's pretty cool. Anyway, that's the end. I just wanted to check out and see what the computers looked like 5 years later. But I don't remember which. I had a Tandy 1000 like in the early 90s that my friend's grandfather gave me because by then it was totally obsolete. I don't remember which one it was. I want to say it might have been this one, but fuzzy memory, right? But anyway, that's just a quick flick through, although I guess not that quick, of a couple of RadioShack catalogs from 1986 and 1991. All right, so I hope you enjoyed just taking a quick look into a couple of RadioShack catalogs. That's going to do it for this episode of CGQ Flashback. If you would like to get a Classic Gaming Quarterly postcard, which, of course, I don't have an example of here to show you, all you have to do is send a postcard into the show from wherever you live to the address that you'll find down in the video description. That's going to be all for this episode. Thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you guys next time.